Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Charles Nix, and I'm excited to be here today with my colleagues Tom Foley and Phil Garnham. Hi, Tom. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Charles.
Hello, Charles. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
So this is our second New Foundries episode, which, I love these episodes because we get to meet young and upcoming type designers. And it's really great to see what we think of as a very established profession of digital type design is being populated by new and better versions of us.
You know, you get a real sense, I think, from the conversations just of how our industry is evolving. You know, it's evolving because new people are willing to jump in and do this full time. So there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot we can learn from that too, I think, as old fogies. We've been around quite a while doing this, so I also find it really inspirational. It's a privilege to be involved in this and to be able to hear people talk about their experience and their inspiration and their ambition and where their journey is taking them.
I think there's been such an explosion as well of new foundries in the world right now. It's just you look at almost every social platform and you are instantly hit with new typography. It's just such a buzz, there's just so much passion and new interpretation everywhere you look. And I think, Monotype has a great opportunity and platform to showcase that. It's really our role now as a type business to support the bigger industry. And that's what I love about this episode, having the ability to do that. So Charles, who are you speaking with today? I believe it's ArrowType, right?
Yes, I spoke with Stephen Nixon, a young type designer who I met some time ago at a Typophiles luncheon. And when I think back, my first Typophiles luncheon, I was the young type designer with a bunch of old typographers. And tables turned. He was the young type designer and I was the old one. But there was an intensity to his work and his carriage that made me know that he was the kind of typographic maniac that I wanted to know more. And we've had a chance to talk since then, and I've gotten a chance to see more of his work, and I really like him, so I wanted to talk more. Tom, how about you? Who did you talk to?
I had a chat with Alja Hrla, who is a co-founder of Type Salon. They're based in Ljubljana in Slovenia, and I've known Alja for quite a long time. We used to work together and we stayed in touch. And then, but like last year, she was featured in It's Nice Stats Global Type Report, and she was part of a panel discussion around, starting a type foundry within a landscape, a cultural landscape, and a design landscape that doesn't have a lot of precedent for typeface design. And they have a really interesting premise for the foundry when they set it up. They kind of wanted to come in and look at Slovenian lettering and graphic arts to try and find a basis or a route for developing a vernacular typographic style from where they're from. And like many places in Europe where there's a history of, colonialism and where countries changed hands over the years, similar to Ireland in my background, there's almost a gap in the kind of visual culture, and particularly in specific crafts like typeface design. So it was a really interesting premise for starting a foundry, and there's a strong connection to culture and place in their work and in their design ethos.
Who did you talk to, Phil?
So I spoke with Matthew Salvaggio at ArrowType, and he's just doing some really inspirational kind of design work, as well as just actually doing some really inspirational work around the business side of type. I really respect his project, which is known as The Box, where he supports younger students that are creating their first typefaces. He brings them into the foundry, he nurtures the creative process, he then actually gives them that amazing opportunity to launch their first typeface with the foundry, and I'm sure they really, really appreciate that as well. So he's a great guy. I've really enjoyed talking with him.
I know, having talked to Stephen, that I've heard more than 33% of this episode, but I'm really looking forward to hearing the other 2/3. It sounds really amazing what you guys did.
Great. So we're going to hand it over to Charles and Stephen Nixon for our first interview.
Hello, I'm Charles Nix. Welcome to Creative Characters. I'm the Senior Executive Creative Director at Monotype, and today I'm joined by Stephen Nixon from ArrowType Foundry. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's really great to be here.
So let's dig right into it. I really want to find out what first drew you into the field of type design. It's not something for everyone, and I'm sure you have some ideas about what makes a type designer, but what drew you into the field of type design?
I grew up in South Dakota, not really a center of graphic design like it is in New York or any large city. But way back in grade school, football teams were a really popular subject for my friend group. This is like second grade or third grade or something. And like I found a little bit of social capital from drawing the logos of our favorite teams a little better than the other people. I didn't actually follow sports aside from the logos really. And then growing up, like in high school, I got into music and bands and such. And I really enjoyed drawing flyers for shows with pencil and ink, and started to get into like the Adobe Illustrator app to make t-shirts or album art for these bands. And late in high school, somebody came as kind of an advertisement for an arts institute, I think, and pointed out that graphic design is like a job that people have and that you can go to school to study. That was pretty mind-blowing to me. I really literally until junior year of high school didn't realize that there were graphic designers in the world. Maybe on some level I realized that people were designing logos and advertisements, but it didn't seem like something that a normal person could go and get into. So I went to college for it. And then sort of similarly, sophomore year of college, we were doing a typography 101 project, but I Googled like Minneapolis type designers. I went to the University of Minnesota and I was curious if anybody had ever designed type in Minneapolis. And lo and behold, Process Type Foundry came up and they're really terrific. And they're making fonts today and they were making fonts back then. And I was like, wow, this is really kind of mind blowing. I thought all these people only worked in the past, but I emailed Eric Olson from Process Type Foundry and said like, hey, like I really love your work that I see. Kettler is a really interesting design that I'd like to ask you about if you would be willing to talk with me. So he said like, sure, come by the studio in St. Paul and I'm happy to talk to you. So I like brought a little recorder that I had borrowed from the school library, and he very, very graciously spent like an hour and a half answering all of my very silly questions as a total noob to type design. I asked what his favorite font was, for instance, and he's like, well, I guess that's whatever I'm working on lately. And he showed me his font that I think it was Colfax or Kronos or something. And it's a bit of a sans serif, slightly DIN-like font where the sides of round characters are straight. And my very, very beginner graphic designer, new to type as an idea brain was like, how is this different from Helvetica? Like the terminals are horizontal, so why would you make this? And he very calmly like explained to me like, oh, well, like if you look at the A, the bold is different in this way. The M doesn't quite go to the baseline in the middle. The sides of characters are flat. And he kind of walked me through like the very high level design traits for it. And later, that font was used for a long time by McDonald's, for instance, as like one of their primary branding fonts. So I really smile and think about Eric Olson every time I see it. So that was a big aha moment, realizing that type design was being done by living people who had really interesting ideas, and it seemed to be a really cool job. So in junior year of college, I was really lucky to study abroad in London at Central St. Martin's. And this was like much more of a design and art school than I was familiar with, to the extent that there was a typographic student interest group. During spring break, that group and I went to the Netherlands to visit KBK, which is a school that has the Type Media Master's Program for type design. And when we visited Type Media, I was again blown away. Like, wow. So not only are there type designers who are living and working, but there's literally a master's program where 12 students go each year and learn from some of the greatest living type designers to make fonts. And this was so cool to me, but it seemed like kind of inaccessible. And like I could tell that all of the designers there seemed to be really talented and really amazing designers from around the world. So I kind of filed it in my mind like, wow, this is a dream, but I don't know if I'll ever do it. I think it was before that actually I started to try to make fonts at school and just learning the very, very basics. I was actually using Fontographer as an app, which even then was like 15 years later than anybody should have really been using it. It was very like rudimentary, and Glyphs app already existed by that point. So like that totally would have been the better introduction to making fonts. But after college, I got a job in New York City for IBM. I was a visual designer for products. And then I kind of moved into a brand experience design role where I was designing websites and helping to develop and enforce style guides across the Watson brand, which really spanned throughout a lot of IBM. And I started to apply to type media because I realized I really love design, but like the type still is the thing that really calls to me. And on my second round of application, I was able to get in. So yeah, I went to type media, really, really loved it. It was like one of the best years of my life, I guess. It was super intense environment. They teach type through many modalities. You do stone carving, you do a revival project where you go out and find an old book at like an open air market, and then you figure out who made that type and how you can approach scanning it and tracing it digitally. You also learn about developing a new style of type based on using brush strokes, and that kind of introduces ideas around letters being a product of the tool they were created with. And then the second semester is a thesis project. And this is kind of what I knew type media for, because every year they have a round of thesis projects from students that are just so creative and seemingly expansive and really pushing boundaries of like what type design is.
It sort of describes perfectly not only the arc of what got you involved, but how you evolved.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at Type Media, and you're, I think what you're learning there, as you were just describing it to us, is where the inspiration for a typeface can come from, like where the form arrives from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too often, I think, we think of type design as putting the sort of spaghetti strands around the form, but it's the form itself. So I wonder if you could talk about where your inspiration as a type designer comes from now.
Well, it's a bunch of places, really. When I went to type media, it was 2017 and 2018. Variable fonts were this new idea that kind of had come about. And part of my goal at that time was figuring out like what is possible to do with this new technology or new application or new kind of accessibility of a technology that has been around for a while. And at a much more basic level, I really love seeing lettering out in the world and finding my own way to sort of respond to that. So I live just south of Greenwood Cemetery, for instance, and during the height of the pandemic, I ended up walking through there almost every day because it's a quiet, beautiful place that's not busy, but also because it's like one of the greatest places to spectate at old lettering in all of New York City. There's gravestones that were carved throughout the 19th century and just beautiful letters everywhere. But they're all hand carved, so they're all different. And that kind of gives you the opportunity to sort of draw your own take on what's there and experiment with how you might be able to make those handmade things in a digital form for a totally different context. Likewise, another of my big projects is called Name Sands, and it's inspired by the tile mosaic lettering of the New York subway system. And those letters were designed and built by many different people over decades. The style I went after was the sans serif style that was kind of started in the 1930s. And yeah, I really love finding old type and thinking like, what features of this appeal to me today through my sort of modern eyes and modern understanding of typography? What features are the way they are because they were speaking to people in that era? And like, what opportunity do I have to make these things come together? And then there's this whole other side of inspiration that's really removed from technology or visual letters, but I'm really inspired by musical instrument design and computer keyboard design. And I've gotten totally obsessed with skateboarding over the last couple of years. There's a lot of inspiration that comes from those fields. In terms of skateboarding, it's just like, wow, this field is like way, way, way harder than anybody on the outside realizes. I tried it as a kid, like when Tony Hawk's Pro Skater had introduced every American kid to the idea of skateboarding. And I wasn't as good as my friends. And I thought, well, it's because I don't have the natural talent for it, clearly. But actually coming up into type design and web development made me realize like, oh, actually doing hard things is really about an infinite process of trying something, seeing what went wrong and changing one thing and trying it again and just doing that over and over and over. And so it's funny that type design and web development kind of allowed me to come back to skateboarding really and say like, no, if I can't ollie, it's not that I lack natural, pure physical ability. It's more that I just need to apply that same process of expecting the thing to take 10,000 tries and changing one thing each try. I see people who are like professional skateboarders and the like sheer mind-bending risks and weird things they do to create something beautiful and interesting and entertaining. And I guess type design is much, much more tame and safe than that. But I have started to think about my work in that light a bit more, thinking like, well, what is there here that I'm doing that I can share with people? Like, what about drawing vectors may be actually kind of fun to talk about and fun to watch for somebody who's just getting into it? What can I create that's maybe surprising? And like, what passion can I bring to it that is beyond what I thought maybe possible?
I wonder if you could take what you do as a type designer, as an individual, and then tell us about how that idea becomes ArrowType. Like, what is the origin of ArrowType and what's its ethos?
Mm-hmm. During Type Media, my thesis project was called Recursive, and it's a type family inspired partly by like the web development scene that I've always been pretty interested in observing, and the programming that I was starting to do to make fonts that were like bigger and more complex and did new things. And partly inspired by sign painting. I've really loved the casual script style that I saw from people like Ken Barber. And then at Type Media, I had an incredible sign painter as a classmate, Jen Ramirez. And so I definitely have to give some credit to him for like making me think like, wow, this casual script is such an amazing genre that we don't typically think about in type design. And so I wanted to kind of merge these two interests and explore what a casual script monospace for code could be. That was a really fun project, and I'm so glad I pursued it. After Type Media, I was able to get freelance work working for Google Fonts, helping them to convert their library into variable fonts. So right in 2018, 2019, they were doing a big push to take all of their static families and move them over into variable fonts. So that's about 1,000 type families at that time. And kind of during that process, they were also starting to look for like, what are some variable font projects that we could commission to explore and sort of highlight the creative possibilities of this technology that people really haven't even looked into or considered yet. And so I was really lucky that Recursive kind of got onto their radar, and they asked me like, oh, would you want to finish this and release it as an open source project as part of this effort to make new interesting variable fonts? And that was so exciting to me, because coming up from graphic design school and like being into web development, Google Fonts was always this very accessible way to try out typography that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise, and a way to play with type and use it for projects. For that effort, I needed a studio and a business. So I needed to figure out like, well, what is my studio and what is my ethos? I was reading a book called Weird Maths about like fascinating subjects in math. And there's a chapter on like ludicrously big numbers. And there's this side of mathematics that seems to be sort of this hilarious contest over the decades of mathematicians to find ways to describe numbers that are so mind-bendingly enormous that they like eclipse the previously defined mind-bendingly enormous numbers from the previous generation. And so that's just like a hilarious competition to me and idea that people would do this. And so one of these ideas, which is really poetic and beautiful, came from Donald Knuth, who's also done really interesting things in terms of computer typography. But he defined something called arrow notation, which is kind of a way to stack exponents. So you can say 3 to the power of 3. I think that's 27. But you can actually stack the exponents. So you can say 3 to the power of 3 to the power of 3. And so suddenly that's 3 to the power of 27, I think, an enormous number. And so you can add up arrows in the middle rather than trying to stack exponents. And from a practical typography standpoint, that's more legible. But it also forces you to try to think about these silly large numbers. What I love about typography and say variable fonts is the infinite but countable and inherently individual uses of typography, all of the endless, expansive amount of instances of possibility within this thing that humans have created. So yeah, ArrowType was kind of my way of saying like typography is endless, and let's try to make some small but significant endless amount of possibilities.
What's going to happen next for ArrowType? Where are you going? What do you want to make next? What does success look like for you?
Yeah, I'm making a monospaced version of Name Sans. I'm making a couple of fonts that are inspired by my walks in Greenwood Cemetery. It's probably a little bit of a strange business decision to debut a Foundry website with like 2/3 of my library inspired by gravestones, but I think that those styles of type are just too endearing to pass up and not to try to explore and see what I can do with them. I really hope to keep communicating about type. I've started a YouTube channel where I kind of share the process of making fonts, and that is inspired again by skateboarding. Actually, some of my favorite YouTube to watch is not the finished products, but I actually really love watching how people are working on things daily. The craft actually happens like in the repetition and slower work of the thing. So I'm trying to share some of that. And to an extent, I don't know yet where the studio is going. I'm really hoping I can keep going. I feel very, very lucky that I was able to, say, get the work for Google Fonts to work on recursive, because not only did that allow me to finish that project, and then it also gave me kind of the opportunity to apply myself to Name Sans, which I was really excited to do. I'm hoping I can keep going, making custom projects for people, exploring these families, kind of broadening things out. We will see.
Well, I hope so too. I think your typographic voice and your speaking voice are both unique, and I want to see more of it.
Thank you.
And I think that everyone should now go immediately to arrowtype.com and read the stories, understand what's behind each of those typefaces. Definitely click through on all of your social media channels because, again, the story just gets deeper. I'm really looking forward to see what you do next, Stephen. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much, Charles. Really a pleasure, and thanks for the great interview. I appreciate it.
If you want to see Stephen's work, you should go to arrowtype.com. And while you're there, scroll down to the bottom of the page and make sure you follow all of his social links. There's plenty of material there. Next up is Tom and Alia. Tom, take it away.
I am delighted to introduce Alia Herla, directress and lead typeface designer at the award-winning Type Salon, an independent type foundry based in Slovenia's capital city, Ljubljana. Alia, you are co-founder and senior typeface designer at Type Salon. Before founding Type Salon with Krista Likar, you gained quite a lot of experience for designing for international brands through your work with Atlas Fonts and Dalton Mag. You also have a keen interest in multi-script typeface design, and you teach at the University of Ljubljana, Academy of Fine Arts and Design. And on top of all this, you volunteer with Tipo Berda, a body that organizes type and lettering workshops in Slovenia. Welcome, Alia. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Tom. Thank you. Thank you for a really nice introduction, and also thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
Oh, pleasure. Let's start at the beginning. Mm-hmm. What drew you into the field and the practice of typeface design? Where did this, I guess it's a passion really, where did it start?
In a way, it's very difficult to say explicit thing that drew me into type design, but I can maybe mention a few things. Firstly, I think I was already interested into drawing letters while I was being younger or in primary school or also gymnasium. So I remember when we got our first computer at home, and I could play with video games, but I would rather play in Word, choosing different typefaces. So this was, in a way, game for me. And now, when I think about that, I remember this one particular font that had melting snow. And for me, this was, wow, so exciting that one font can actually have illustration of snow. So I was really enjoying these features that Word in early 2000 have. So this, and then I actually went to study graphic design in University of Ljubljana because of photography. I really wanted to focus in photography. But then during the first year, we didn't have any class of photography, but more typographical courses of history of typography and also type design. And I think the structure of the course of type design really opened my mind or introduced me to typeface design, because before I wasn't aware of the typeface or that it actually exists and you can design your own typeface.
Yeah, I think it's a common narrative that we hear with typeface designers. I think just an aptitude or an underlying interest in this thing, which is a form of writing or rendering, language. So it's probably quite a natural human interest. But you started your education with photography, or at least your formal design education with photography, and moved into type. So I'm guessing you're the kind of person that has quite a broad range of interests creatively. Yeah.
Yes.
So where do you look for inspiration? Where do you find those original ideas that you then maybe pull into your type design practice?
Since I moved back from London, back to Slovenia, I started to appreciate the culture and my country more. And this is also the content that I would like to explore more, or at least understand why we as a society are doing things like this. And maybe they are a bit different than community in London or Balkans, maybe southern part of Balkan. So I was always interested into society and also art history. And I think now more and more I am actually influenced by contemporary typeface designs, but what I would really like to study more is history and location that I grew up or affected me throughout growing.
So can you elaborate on that? Because you grew up in Ljubljana, right? You grew up there.
No, I grew up in suburbs of a very small town called Slovenj, and it's very close to Austria. So we have a little bit of influence of Austrian-Hungarian monarchy. So I was living in London, I realized I'm actually coming from a really small village, surrounded by nature and animals. And since I moved back from London or from Berlin, from bigger cities, I started to realize the quality of life here is different. It's a bit slower and it feels like you have more time for yourself here. And it's not only about work, but it's also about having free time and enjoying the nature, which is very close. I think in London, during the week was filled with work, and there was not a lot of time for doing other things. To go to gallery during the week, I think it was very difficult, or just to go for a coffee to another part of the city. Whereas I'm used to going for coffee after the work, and I can meet my friends in 15 minutes, and everything feels easier in a way because commuting is easier. You don't need so much time to get to the work or to go to home or for sport activities or some cultural things. But then there are less opportunities in order to get big clients or big projects. So yeah, there are positives and negatives about living in so small country that a lot of people don't even know that it exists.
Yeah. Like you said, there's pros and cons when you live and work in London. I live and work in London. I've been here for 17 years, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And what you talked about, like my days are filled with work, and then my evenings are filled with parenting, and my weekends are filled with trying to recover. But no, you're right. And there's pros and cons. And I think,
yes, definitely.
I guess what I find really interesting is about how this idea of trying to find a way to build a life around a passion like typeface design. Like, to me, it sounds like you quite consciously moved back to Ljubljana because you wanted a better quality of life, a better balance. And that is interesting because I think that's a challenge I've always had, is like balancing work and life, and then finding the sweet spot of where you're plugged in enough that you feel like you're on top of it and you're being inspired, but that you're also not neglecting different parts of your life. And that's a challenge. So you moved back from London, was it 2020 or 21?
2019.
19, okay, 2019. And then you moved back from this busy city and you set up Type Salon around that time. Or when did that all happen? What's the timeline about how Type Salon came into existence?
So we founded Type Salon with my colleague Krista Likar during the lockdowns, actually, the first lockdowns in 2020. But we started to work together or organize Tipo Brda workshops and talks, typographical talks, already in 2016. So we met in 2016, our professor of type design, Domen Vraz, he introduced us. and proposed that we organize next typographical talk or workshop. And we were very interested. And it was very successful, small type talk event. And then we were thinking about founding Type Foundry. But then at the time wasn't right. I applied for internship position at Dalton Mac and I moved to London. And then as soon as I get back to Ljubljana, we started to talk about possibilities of at least releasing some typefaces that we have in our archives and then slowly progressing to Type Salon as a foundry and studio.
So it was a pretty organic thing. Was it something that you kind of, is it something you'd always hoped to do or planned to do, or did it just kind of happen?
Until then, I haven't released any typefaces by my own as under my name. And I really wanted to do that. For me, it still felt like this great thing that could happen to me, even though I have designed typefaces that were way bigger or maybe for bigger clients. But until then, it was only for other studios or foundries. I just wanted to know what does it feel when you release typeface by your own.
And does it feel different?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that I actually released this typeface during the most strict lockdowns. And like 1 year before, I thought this is going to be, I'm going to make party or at least some big event, like my typeface is released. But then I was laying in my bed because I was sick. I had corona exactly that time. And so it wasn't what I imagining to be. But so no one actually noticed it, that my typeface is released. Only me and Krista knew. So it was different, but now I can say different also in a way that it's not finished. The typeface is not finished when it's released, but this is when it starts. And then there is so much more work for you to be done once typeface is released.
So I guess you're talking about promotion and the business of running a type foundry.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's it been like running a business that sells type?
Yeah, I never thought that I'm going to be working in a business. I always thought that I'm just only going to be designer or creative or enjoying the craftsmanship. Now I'm realizing that there is so much more. There is administration, there is marketing. Yes, and I feel like I need to sell my own design. So it's not the best thing or the thing that I wished for, but I'm also learning about it.
No, it's
trying to enjoy it, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really necessary part, isn't it, of running any creative business is like you said, it's the operations and the administration and the finances and all that stuff. And I think we don't get a lot of that at design university or design education, third level. We don't learn a lot about how to run a business. So how are you figuring that out? Are you just kind of learning as you go? For our listeners who are budding typeface designers who are going to start their own studio next year, their own type foundry, can you give a sense of what that's like or how you go about figuring that out?
Yeah, firstly, I would like to mention that I'm still learning every day. In one way, I really want to design what feels right for me. And as soon as I feel very comfortable about the project that I release, for me, this is the most important thing. Maybe from the business perspective, it's not the best. Maybe I should think more about the future of the typeface, but I still think that once you do it with your passion and you're really enjoying it, I think this shows in your design. So I'm still on this side of the business that you need to work with your heart and then people around you are going to notice it. This is maybe utopian.
No, I think that's possibly almost the only way sometimes as well. You know, I mean, I've never run my own type business, so I shouldn't be speaking like I know what I'm talking about. But my wife runs her own creative business and it's a constant challenge. And the best results always come out of following her creative vision, and her creative impulse generally leads her to the best kind of business decisions eventually.
It takes time. I think it takes time, and no one mentioned that to me before, because sometimes I'm impatient and I guess I just need to tell to myself, just wait maybe a year or two and then your work is going to be seen.
I mean, your work is very beautiful. You guys make great typefaces. And so don't stop doing that, please. Type Salon, as you said, happened quite gradually and organically, but through a long kind of working relationship and friendship. And then you kind of set things up during lockdown, which is amazing that you did that at that time. And you've had this kind of gradual sort of development or establishment of the foundry. Where you guys are now, like, do you have like a specific ethos or a specific purpose or vision with Type Salon, or is it just, again, doing this because it feels right?
The initial idea of Type Salon was to study typography or letterings that were done in Slovenia and then basing this knowledge into new typefaces. And I still like this idea. I would really like to explore more what was happening 100 years ago, because in a way Slovenia didn't have any type foundry in a way of lead type. So we were always buying or getting lead types from Germany or Italy. So we can't talk about Slovenian type foundries like 300 years ago. But there were artists and architects that were exploring letter shapes. And I would really like to explore this part of Slovenian history and use it in a way of in contemporary typefaces, so at least having as a base for designing new typefaces. We have a little bit less time now that we are focusing into typeface design, because we would like to do other projects or maybe put more effort into marketing our existing typefaces or understanding the market.
You know, what does success look like for you as a typeface designer and for Type Salon as a foundry?
I think it depends on the day that you ask me. For today, I would say I feel excitement whenever I see that our typeface is in use. It brings me joy, because I still don't understand how graphic designers found out about our typefaces. Getting custom project is also exciting for me, because again, there is someone that found my work interesting, or they would like to collaborate with me, and especially if they offer a little nice project or nice custom typeface or a lettering, this brings me joy. So I would still like to work as a teacher, or at least mentoring some workshops or teaching at the academy, because this also in a way brings me joy. And also I realized that I'm learning a lot just by teaching or mentoring workshops. It's different kind of learning curve, but I need to understand the content that I'm teaching so well that I'm comfortable in teaching it. So it's challenging, and I really like challenges.
That's a great answer. First of all, it does depend on the day, I think, for most people, for sure. What came through for me, or comes through for me, is that success is the joy of doing this, or having the privilege to do this every day as a career.
Yes.
Finally, I want to finish up with one more question. What are you working on at the moment, or maybe what should our listeners keep an eye out for from you and from Type Salon?
So we are currently working on a project that is called Dotless Type, and it is going to be a platform of unfinished typefaces. So while mentoring or while teaching, or also in my archive, I noticed that there are so many unfinished fonts, and the only one that is using them is me. And I would really like others to use those unfinished typefaces, maybe just for posters or some small words, because they could go out in the world without being 100% done. So this is the project that we are currently working on, and it's going to be released in December.
That sounds great. So these are going to be, like you said, a collection of unfinished or in progress typefaces that you have in your back pocket. And they'll be available for commercial use or something. You'd be able to get. Oh, great, fantastic. Yeah. So it's called Dotless Type.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Alia. Absolute pleasure. Since we worked together early on, I think it was back in 2017, 2018, I could kind of tell you were going places. You were very talented and very passionate and diligent. So, it's lovely to reconnect and just to have a chance to kind of hear what you've been up to since we last spoke, which is quite a few years ago now.
Thank you, Tom.
But yeah, and I want to wish you well and stay in touch. And I hope our listeners, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I had having this conversation with you. Thank you so much, Alia. It's been great.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for kind words, and also I really enjoyed this chat with you.
So if you want to see more of Type Salon's work and Alia's work, just head over to type-salon.com And check out also their new Dotless project, which we discussed in the conversation. And next up is Phil and Matthew.
So, hey Matthew, it's lovely to have you on the show today. And you know I'm a huge fan of BlazeType and all the good things you're doing at the Foundry. I think it's fantastic. I'm super chuffed to have you here and just sharing all the goodness, all the Blaze goodness with everyone. So as a way as an introduction to you in the Foundry, BlazeType, it really came on my radar a few years ago when I was working on a custom font project. And I stumbled upon this most amazing Rotunda black letter font named Emeritus, which seriously is a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But from then on, I've been following Blaze and stalking you a little bit and on your journey and just, obsessing over your Foundry, which continues to amaze me. You have 40 to 50 type families now. You probably launched more already. You're supporting student type designers, which with the Box project, I think that's fantastic. You have the educational program and also, doing tons of custom font work, which is really inspiring and working with great agencies. I mean, first question, I guess, is do you ever sleep?
First, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be talking with you about the Foundry, obviously. We do sleep, but, there's so many things to do that are related to type and type design. So try to go in all directions at the same time, and pretty much everyone who's involved in the Foundry has an interest in something.
Let's go back to the beginning. Why did you get into type design in the first place? What led you here?
Well, I was a pretty classic kind of studying. Like I was studying art direction and graphic design in Lyon back then. I didn't come from a background with artists or designers in my family. So, the whole type family, typeface things was very clouded for me. I actually had no idea that at some point that there were people, designing this stuff that we had on computers.
Yeah.
And back then we had a talk at the school I was studying from Jean-Baptiste Levé at Production Type. And that's how I discovered that there were people designing this stuff, And it's completely struck me, I was, wow, this is amazing. Like, I really want to do that. So I tried my best to do that on my own, because back then there were not a lot of resources online. You maybe had a few books around, but I had no idea about them until way later. And the few schools that were available were in Paris. And being the broke student that I was not able to even try going there. Starting in the type design thing, learning it was rather long and a harsh process, because I was on my own. And, we were working on FontLab 5 back then. So it was like a very, very complex software back then. Now it's way better. But having no resources and no one to explain to you how the software works was such a painful process to learn.
Oh, I can imagine, even myself, I grew up with Fontographer and then FontLab 5, but having someone in the room and just being able to ask that question, just another brain, it just makes such a difference in terms of how quickly you get up and going.
Definitely.
So walk us through the birth of the Foundry from being a type designer and learning type. How did the Foundry start?
Well, it came rather naturally to me to start my own thing and launch BlazeType. So BlazeType was released in 2017. And back then, there were not as many foundries as there are now. And I figure, I don't see any foundries around that can represent the ideas that I have toward a simple way of licensing things and having a single price for everything. So I simply decided to have things on my own.
Yeah.
And to be completely transparent with you, there was this on one side, and on the other end, since I didn't go through the classic type design schools, type centership and everything, I think maybe I was not sure that my work will be, appreciated through the eyes of, well-experienced type designers. So I said, to hell with it. I'm going to launch my own stuff and we'll see how it goes,
Yeah, it's a great attitude. And I think even for me, like yourself, I didn't study type design. I learned on the job day one, designed this logo for such and such brand, and it was it is a lot of pressure, and I never felt accepted in the industry for a long time, actually. So I think it's entirely natural the way you feel about it. How is the team set up? Do you have an internal team, or do you work with external contributors as well?
The way the company is built toward the releasing of new typefaces is more of a meeting. Like we meet somebody that we want to work with, we have an interest in the work, and so we work with them in designing and producing the font to be released. When we have custom font work, depending on the complexity of the job, we have people coming in to work on it, depending on the languages as well, because one of the core idea of BlazeType is to develop languages that we are comfortable with and native speakers of. So, for example, when we work on Cyrillic, we work with people who actually speak the language, and same goes for Arabic, Hebrew, Thai, Khmer, whatever. So it brings a rather expert kind of approach, I think, to the language development. But yeah, the company is separated between me, other typeface designers, motion designers, web designers, developers, a legal department as well. I never take the time to actually assess how many people are involved in the company, but there are quite a few now.
Yeah, much bigger than being just the one business. It's like a whole community of people. And
yeah,
I love what you said about working with native readers as well. You can approach the design of the fonts in such more of a culturally respectful way, which I think's super nice.
Exactly.
I mean, so I guess it's like one thing to love type, it's another to kind of make a business out of type. You know, how do you balance your creative goals with kind of business goals, or are they the same thing?
It's a complex question. I think we have been very blessed and very lucky in the way the BlazeType has grown, and people loving our work and having the opportunity to work with great brands and great studio and everything. We love designing fonts, and we always try to not look at the font catalog as trying to see what should we design now to fit inside of the catalog to have something balanced and everything. We just go with the flow. Like, yeah, we feel like designing a black letter with so many different influences, and okay, let's go with Emeritus and see what happens. You know, it's just, it's kind of weird because we actually design for ourselves first. And if people are pleased with that, then it's awesome, you know. But if not, like, we'll keep on designing stuff anyway.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if there was like a Blaze audience or a Blaze customer, or like if you always have someone in mind when you're designing your fonts.
We don't try to design things with a certain category of people aimed. You know, like we don't do a grotesque thinking like, okay, this is going to be super good for motion designers, or a display font for posters designer. We just design fonts that we love and things we want to explore and experiment on. For example, Léon Hugues is a French type designer, amazing, talented guy who I work with a lot. And he always kind of makes fun of me every time I talk to him about this. But I have this focus on every year I design a grotesque or sans serif or neo-grotesque kind of font family. I feel that these kind of styles in typeface is far from being perfect, and there's always room for improvement and finding it. It's like my kind of Japanese way of working in the font industry. I want to nail a good sans serif typeface, and every time I do one, after a few months, I feel like there's other stuff I need to go at.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the same with every typeface, to be fair. Like, you just got to keep chiseling away, and then, I don't know. It's a classic anecdote from most type designers. I feel like they just look at their work 2 months later and like, nah, it's terrible. Don't buy it.
Yeah.
I'll fix it next week or do something else. It's just like,
we try to actually update our work a lot on Blaze. Like, most of the font families are updated on a yearly basis, whether it's the design or the spacing on some new features in the variable, or we always reopen the files and look at them and try to think of a better way to make them.
To create anything at all, I think it requires some form of inspiring kind of moment in time. So I'm really interested, like, where are you kind of looking? What are you seeing? Is there a Blaze way of doing things?
So yes, I think so. Especially in the first years, maybe less now because we try to have a broader way of looking at things. But back then, I was very influenced by mythology and antique stories. So there was a lot of inspiration in these stories. Like, so that's why you have APOC, that's why you have Surt, that's why you have Argus, Oroban, and these things. But as I grew in the field, I shifted to other things that I like and enjoy, such as the architecture. That's why you have area, for example. And it builds on things like that surround you, I think. It's like obviously you get also inspired by other fonts that you see in the street or other designers releasing stuff, because you always have images gathered in your head. And looking at old type specimens is super inspiring as well. And lettering is super inspiring. But to me, at least, and to some extent, maybe Blaze type as a whole, what inspires us is pretty much everything that is around us. You read a book, you get inspired. You read a poem, you get inspired. You hear a song, you watch a movie, you walk in the street, you go to the park, whatever. Like everything can be inspiring if you look at it with a keen eye and a candid eye.
Definitely. What's the future for Blaze?
Well, we have a lot of ideas in typefaces to be released, a lot of new designers to be working with on the box. So I'm working still on a different book, which will be more focused on optical design. But I'm also discussing with a few friends on trying to build something. I cannot speak too much about it to teach type design to people. So we're trying to wrap our head around an interesting way to teach people that field.
That's amazing. Let's talk about the box. Like, I really love that initiative because, as I understand it, it supports so many young creatives coming in, getting their first break in type design. I mean, how did that come about? How do your students feel about it as well?
At first, it was really aimed, as you say, toward youngsters in studying, or now it's more meant for anyone who is keen on releasing fonts. Some font designers on the box have released fonts before. It's not necessarily their first font release. The real core of the box is a fun and experimental ground for designers. So there's different stories behind the box. The first and more important one to me is to allow designers who are not known in the field to feel like there is a place for them to maybe have a place to release work, because we don't accept all the stuff that are sent to us. We do have a long process of thinking and looking at the stuff. And the idea is to work with them all the way through the design and the production until the release. So I wanted to have this side project of Blaze Type because I would have loved to have something like that when I was a student,
Yeah. Oh, God. Absolutely. Like, when you think about that production process as well, and not many people, I think it's so undervalued, being able to produce a typeface to a really high standard in terms of engineering. It's super hard, and to have like your support, I can imagine that's just unbelievably awesome.
Yeah, in a way, it's also fun to teach and show tricks to people. So I think it's been a rather welcomed adventure. Awesome. I'm excited to see the future of it.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining our Young Foundry podcast today.
My pleasure.
And sharing your love and passion for typography with everyone at Monotype too. I wish you all the best. Let's keep talking. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen next at Blaze Type. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It was lovely. Cheers.
So, if you want to see more of Matthew's work, you should go to blazetype.eu. As always, look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode, and check out monotype.com/podcast to read all about our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please rate it and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It's produced by Christopher Olin, Mia Sullivan, and Marie Tabarez. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Take care.